Hey, how are you? I'm SliceofOtaku, and in the world of Avatar, there is no shortage of capable benders across any of the four primary elements. Over the course of several generations, the world has seen extreme cases of both development and degradation when it comes to the various elemental arts. From the discovery of bloodbending by Hama to its furtherance by way of Yakone and later Amon. From the tutelage of dragons to the volatile and spiritually inept state of firebending over the course of the 100-Year War. The concept of bending mastery is to a certain extent a fluid concept, as the basis for mastery certainly changes with the passage of time. However, there is one particular classification of bending that has by and large been lost to time: energy bending. Now, what exactly is energy bending? As based on the name alone, it's certainly not as clear-cut as the ever-present four elements stand to be. Well, technically the term was never actually coined during The Last Airbender or The Legend of Korra, but was actually provided to us by means of the Avatar Extras television series. Shout out to the OG Avatar fans that remember that one. Properly introduced at the very end of The Last Airbender story, energy bending was taught to Avatar Aang by the very last lion turtle in existence. And with this great power, Aang was able to subvert all expectations shared by the masses, his closest allies, and even his past lives, by sparing the life of the wicked Fire Lord Ozai and instead removing his ability to firebend entirely. This was a major development and a solution to Avatar Aang's moral conundrum that not a single person even knew was a possibility. But why? Why would something so incredibly powerful simply be left to the passage of time, fading into virtual non-existence? Well, friends, there are many reasons for this. One such being that the past is forever, but history is not. Which may at first sound confusing, but allow me to explain. That which has already occurred may never be truly changed, but the chronicle of such events is as fickle as those who transcribe it. A sentiment we may be able to corroborate on an even smaller scale, as with the passage of a single century, knowledge of Airbender civilization had by and large been cleaved from the collective consciousness of the world's populace following their genocide. With their practices and traditions having been ever cloistered and rather dissimilar from the practices of other cultures, with their absence and lack of a testimony, a great many questions would begin to accumulate. Questions which would then be met with biased hypotheses and theoretical deductions. And I mean, even the late Airbenders themselves were no exception to this, as what was once the celebratory reverence of an ancient spirit would come to be known as Avatar Yang Chen's festival following her death. Furthermore, this subject matter, in the particular case of the Fire Nation, would be shrouded in war-based propaganda. Even the records of the ever-wise and sagacious Wan Shi Tong failed to avoid such historical duplicity, as a great many of his documents come from the human world. And so with all this in mind, in respects to energy bending being a practice of over 10,000 years old, predating even the presence of the Avatar, I find it understandable why such history wouldn't find purchase in the minds of the living. Especially when knowledge of Avatar 1, or a time when the human and spirit worlds were intertwined, wasn't even something that was generally recollected. Although, one may argue that such information isn't as lost as we may otherwise be made to believe, considering Tenzin, while giving Korra a pep talk at the end of Book 2, spoke of how the ancients manipulated the cosmic energies around them. But I would argue that this was simply a retelling of what Avatar Aang must have told the world following his victory against Fire Lord Ozai. But besides all that, the otherwise self-destructive nature of energy bending serves to render it unapproachable to just about any mortal being. For your typical bender to bend their respective element, at times such a thing may very well be involuntary or accidental. This of course possesses the possibility of danger, as the unrestricted use of such might could certainly prove lethal. But on the other hand, it may just as well be harmless and or inconsequential. When it comes to energy bending, however, the very spirit of one's being will always hang in the balance. To alter the spirit of another and bend it to one's own will, the spirit of the practitioner must be both unwavering and indomitable, as to do otherwise would lead to corruption and by extension, utter destruction. And this is certainly a tall order for anyone plighted by the crux of mortality. Humans are inherently ever-changing, adaptive creatures. To consolidate oneself to such an extent is an extraordinary feat, but somewhat of a limiting one, as this flexibility stands to be one of humanity's greatest virtues. Growth and change is what leads to progression and innovation, reflection and understanding. And with that, energy bending is to me an inhuman ability. It's something that is extremely rare even amongst avatars, but at the very least, they have a leg up as they themselves are not quite human. Being part spirit by way of Rava is an incredible boon in this regard, as there is a part of them that is eternal and ever in pursuit of goodness. Now, the lion turtle that met with Avatar Aang spoke of energy bending being from a bygone time prior to elemental bending. Yet when we see this world during the lifetime of Avatar Wan, we see no such inclusion, which leads me to believe that energy bending may very well have its origins traced back to the very genesis of humanity itself. We really and truly don't know very much at all when it comes to this time period, but we do know that for some reason or another, lion turtles, which are regarded by the Great Spirit of Light Rava to be ancient, despite she herself having lived 10,000 lifetimes before humans came into existence, served as a host of human establishments and provided them with elemental manipulation, the preservation and survival of humans being important to them. So much so that even during Avatar Aang's lifetime, he was approached by one on account of Ozai's impending slaughter. Energy bending, as I imagine it, may have been a promising prospect that ultimately conflicted with the overall intended design of the species as we know it. On one hand, you have the stance of the spirit General Old Iron that at the core of human nature is the will to dominate, and on the other, you have that of the spirit Lady Tian Hai that believes it is instead to create. Such rampant spiritual domination would only lead to dismay and stagnation, with no desire for innovation that would typically spark the drive for creation. So, with the practice being so inverse to the existence of man, it would simply just go away. And with all of that out of the way, in the case that one does harness its power, besides the aforementioned application of bending removal, what can it do? Well, as we saw from the legend of Korra, it can bestow bending as well. Korra herself had her bending somewhat technically restored by herself, as her commune with Aang did the trick. But she also in turn did the very same for Lin Beifong, restoring her earthbending. Yet the question remains, could an energy bender provide a non-bender with bending? And personally, I don't see why not. The lion turtles were able to do so, and do so despite a person's biological prerequisites, as Avatar Wan was able to receive from every type. But lest we forget, the bestowal of more than one element would be far too much for the human body to bear. Now, I'll be honest with you, the preceding cases are a tad bit ridiculous to me, but such is the blight of Korra Book 2, so please bear with me. With her connection to the Tree of Time, Avatar Korra was able to bend the energy within herself to project an astral form of her own spirit that to a certain extent was corporeal and capable of bending the elements, which sort of renders the avatar state kinda useless, but I digress. Prior to her doing so, she was met with a pathway to herself that mirrored that which Avatar Aang was faced during his training with Guru Patik. But you know, the resultant proposed by the prospect was rather different from what was received here, and the process to doing so didn't require any intense self-reflection. So it's really hard to even say that these two processes were related at all, as it was more than likely just a purely visual rehash of one of the coolest depictions to come from the original series. Lastly, we have the bending of spiritual energy, to which Korra employed quite a fair bit over the course of her series. even to the point of unconsciously doing so, warping the spirits around her to become malicious and deranged. It is a very dangerous use of the ability that would only serve to have humanity further domineer the spirits around them. One thing I wasn't really fond of with this application, however, was that Uncle Iroh, despite now being a spirit himself, remained unaffected for the sake of story convention. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. Energy bending, otherwise referred to as unbending or anti-bending by the show's creators, was something devised and intended since the early beginnings of the series, along with the general concept of the Lion's Hurdles, as they first appeared during the main title sequence of the pilot episode. Energy bending is a spectacular ability, and seeing as how rare and dangerous it stands to be, I completely understand why it is so sparsely displayed throughout the series. I mean, sometimes being vague with major plot points is the way to go, as it can really get fan curiosity going, and I believe that was expertly executed in this case. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this one as much as I did creating it, as it is really an interesting subject, and I imagine more appealing to the masses than our previous video on non-benders, but regardless, I'm happy to continue bringing you all videos centered on the things I find interesting about these various fictional worlds. So if that's something you're into, go ahead and stick around with the channel for more by subscribing. And if you'd like more content from me elsewhere, be sure to follow me over on Twitch at SliceofOtaku, where we can talk about things like this in real time while enjoying each other's company with some video games. With all that being said, thank you all so much for watching and have an awesome day. I love you.